This book, The Power of Strangers by Keohane, really got to me, I gotta say.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, the very first story about, the taxi driver in Nantucket, her parents were like, okay, you have a disability. We're going to enroll you in dance classes.
Wow.
Not, for any kind of therapy or anything, but like so she could learn to fall gracefully.
Yeah, wow.
It's my family's kind of into that dark humor,
Yeah.
So it just grabbed me right away.
Right.
And it clearly sparks something in Keohane too, because he dives deep into all these little encounters we have with people, people we don't know, strangers.
It is, I think that's what's so fascinating about that opening anecdote. It's this almost wry, almost absurd moment, but then it becomes this launching point for, exploring something so fundamental.
Yeah.
Our relationship with the vast majority of people we encounter. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, it just makes you think about all those missed connections, all those unspoken interactions.
Right.
Which is, that's really what this whole deep dive is about for you, right? Understanding that kind of hidden world of stranger interaction.
Exactly. And it's funny because you're curious about like why we keep our heads down, why don't we chat with people we don't know? And then what happens when we do, strike up a conversation? What are we missing out on? And so we're going to go into those, awkward moments and elevators and on park benches. And by the end, I'm hoping, there will be some real aha moments like, oh, wow, things that just kind of shift your perspective on these everyday encounters.
Yeah, and if we zoom out a bit, I think what we're really looking at here is this, core aspect of being human, which is our ability to connect, to form communities.
Right.
And, we're just specifically looking at those connections that exist outside our, immediate circle of friends and family.
Yeah.
And looking at the psychological and social, forces at play. And even, tapping into our evolutionary history.
Wow.
To try to understand why we behave the way we do.
Right. So let's just dive right in. What happens when you do break the ice with someone you don't know? The book introduces us to this woman, Georgie Nightingale, in London, and her organization, Trigger Conversations.
Yeah.
What's the core idea behind what she's doing?
I think the central insight from Nightingale's work is that our discomfort with talking to strangers, it's not like some fixed human trait.
Yeah.
It's more like a learned habit.
Oh, interesting.
It's a kind of social muscle that, can atrophy if we don't use it.
Okay.
So Trigger Conversations is really about retraining that muscle, through these structured workshops that encourage people to move beyond that, kind of superficial small talk.
Yeah, she has this whole manifesto for Trigger Conversations about being adventurers in conversation and seeing everyone as a potential teacher. So it sounds like she's really trying to shift people's mindset.
Absolutely, and I think her declaration, which is, we are adventurers in conversation. We are travelers with no destination. Explore the unknown. Unburdened. Everyone is a teacher. Everyone is an opportunity. That really it sets the tone, to approach strangers with curiosity rather than apprehension, right?
Yes.
And this isn't an isolated initiative either.
Okay.
The UK has actually been pretty proactive in trying to address loneliness, right? They even appointed a minister for loneliness, which, really highlights the societal importance of connection.
Right.
And you see other initiatives like these chatty cafes and the BBC's Bus Chat Day that further emphasize this, national effort to encourage interaction.
It's almost counterintuitive, right? We often think of Brits as being so reserved.
Yeah.
And yet there seems to be this active push for more connection.
Right.
So how does Nightingale actually get people to open up in these workshops? What's the mechanism?
So her method really involves creating this this safe and structured environment to overcome that initial, awkwardness, right? So she uses specific conversation prompts, often on cards, and sets time limits for each exchange.
Oh, interesting.
So this removes the pressure of having to, come up with topics on the spot.
Yeah.
And it also provides a natural endpoint.
Right.
So, people are often paired up or put in small groups. They might get a prompt like, what's something you're looking forward to?
Okay.
And then they have a few minutes to discuss it.
That makes sense, yeah.
Yeah.
And the book mentions a feeling of liberation that participants experience, which is a powerful word.
Yeah.
But what happens when they step outside the workshop? Are they still relying on those prompt cards?
That's That's the crucial next step.
Right.
And it's something that Nightingale is very aware of.
Okay.
The workshops provide that initial spark, that practice.
Yeah.
But the real aim is for people to, to internalize those skills.
Right.
To feel confident enough to initiate these conversations organically in their daily lives without needing a prompt.
Okay.
And the participants, they expressed a real desire to bridge that gap.
Which brings us to what seems like the biggest hurdle, actually starting a conversation, right?
Right.
What did Nightingale discover about this initial step?
So she found that, often the biggest barrier is just overcoming that initial inertia, right?
Yeah.
And appearing approachable.
Right.
So looking safe and friendly is key.
Okay.
And interestingly, she noticed that older people seem to find it easier to strike up conversations.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Maybe they're perceived as less threatening.
Right.
Or maybe there's, a societal norm that gives them more leeway to initiate contact. But, yeah, that was an interesting observation.
It rings true. There does seem to be a certain, societal comfort level with older people initiating chats. So what about the very first words exchanged, What seems to work?
Well, Nightingale emphasizes the power of, a genuine, how are you?
Okay.
Not just a perfunctory one.
Right.
It's about making eye contact,
Yeah.
using a warm tone,
Right.
signaling that you're actually, interested in the response.
Yeah.
And this can, it can build a surprising amount of trust.
Okay.
And it encourages the other person to, to reciprocate, to share a bit more.
Yeah, and the book tells this really touching story.
Oh, yeah.
About this workshop participant who finds this unexpected common ground with someone she wouldn't normally interact with.
Right.
It really shows the potential for these surprising connections.
Absolutely. And this participant was, genuinely surprised by how much she had in common with this person she'd, initially perceived as being very different from her.
Right.
And it fostered this, sense of belonging, a feeling of being connected to this larger human network, which could be incredibly, uplifting.
And Nightingale sees these small interactions as having a ripple effect, potentially even bridging social divides.
Right.
It's quite an optimistic view.
Yeah, she believes these meaningful, albeit brief encounters with strangers, that they can bring these, small moments of joy.
Right.
And contribute to a more connected, less polarized society.
Okay.
She really sees it as a fundamental shift in how we, relate to each other in our daily lives.
The workshop also touches on, those 4 stages of learning any skill.
Oh, yeah.
Including communication, moving from, not even knowing what you don't know to mastery.
Right. Exactly. And the goal is to guide the participants through those stages from that, unconscious incompetence, where they're not even aware of their communication habits,
right,
to unconscious competence, where positive interactions become almost automatic.
Interesting.
So it's about building that awareness, practicing new behaviors, and eventually making them second nature.
And we get a glimpse into why people were drawn to the workshops in the first place. Like this woman, Justine, was struck by the contrast in friendliness, I guess, between London and her native Australia.
Yeah, and Justine's experience really highlights how deeply ingrained these cultural norms around stranger interaction can be, right? What's considered a friendly greeting in one culture might be, perceived as with suspicion or indifference in another.
Yeah.
And her concern about her weight being a barrier to interaction really speaks to the personal insecurities that can prevent us from reaching out.
Then there's Paula, who felt like her interactions, even with people she knew, lacked genuine connection.
Right. And Paula's struggle with feeling inauthentic is something that I think a lot of people can relate to. That desire for deeper, more meaningful connections, even in these casual encounters, it's a powerful motivator.
Right.
And that fear of vulnerability, it's a common hurdle.
And then there was Nikki, who moved from this rural farm to, bustling London, and was looking for greater conversational freedom.
Right. Nikki's perspective is interesting.
Yeah.
He saw mastering interactions with strangers as a key to feeling comfortable and connected in any environment.
Right.
It's a way to navigate this new and potentially isolating, urban landscape.
And then Margot, who initially seemed quite skeptical about wanting to connect with strangers at all, And her comment about the waiter scenario being a uniquely American thing was intriguing.
Right. I think Margot's initial disinterest provides a valuable counterpoint.
Yeah.
Reminding us that, not everyone has that innate desire to connect with strangers.
Right.
And her comment about the waiter probably reflects, different cultural expectations.
Yeah.
Around, service interactions. But even Margot found a surprising connection with you.
I know.
Highlighting how these moments can sometimes catch us off guard.
Yeah. Definitely sounds like those initial workshop sessions were pushing people outside their comfort zones.
Yeah.
And the book doesn't shy away from the fact that, it can feel awkward, vulnerable.
Right.
This leads to the big question. Why do we so often avoid these interactions in the first place?
And this is where it gets really interesting. Keohane argues that by habitually avoiding strangers, we're actually missing out on this surprisingly accessible source of happiness.
Interesting.
And the research over the last 15 years, really strongly supports this.
Oh, wow.
Studies have shown consistently that even these brief interactions with strangers can boost our mood, make us feel more connected to our communities, sharpen our cognitive function, improve our overall health, increase our trust in others, and even foster a greater sense of optimism.
That is quite a list of benefits.
It is.
It almost feels paradoxical, given our, ingrained tendency to keep to ourselves.
It does. And to illustrate this, the book tells the story of Nick, a nurse in Las Vegas, and her fascinating idea of greyhound therapy. Have you heard of this?
So Nick grew up with this deep-seated fear of strangers.
Oh, wow.
Which, is a message she kind of internalized from childhood. Right. Strangers are bad, they'll hurt you.
Wow.
But her own life experiences, especially when she started traveling, directly contradicted this.
Okay.
She found this unexpected kindness, a sense of belonging, and genuine connection in interactions with people she had never met before.
And I think what's so powerful about Nick's story is this stark contrast between that early fear-based conditioning, which, likely stemmed from this, very sheltered home environment.
Right.
And then her subsequent positive encounters, that pivotal trip to Europe at age 17, where strangers readily engaged with her, that was a real turning point.
Right.
It significantly boosted her confidence and challenged those deeply ingrained fears.
And she actively continued this therapy, intentionally striking up conversations in everyday, very mundane settings.
Exactly. In places like restaurants, bus stops, grocery stores, the very locations where, most of us tend to keep to ourselves.
Right.
And she developed this, cautious but open approach.
Okay.
Learning to read social cues, trusting her intuition about who might be receptive to a, brief chat.
Right.
And her background, navigating a less than harmonious family dynamic, probably sharpened her ability to assess social situations.
Interesting, yeah. The book also highlights how reaching out to strangers helped her through some really tough personal times.
Yeah.
That's quite profound.
It is. These small positive connections really acted as a lifeline during moments of, hardship, reinforcing her belief in, the fundamental goodness of people.
Yeah.
And the power of even those fleeting moments of connection with the unfamiliar.
Yeah.
It became a source of resilience for her.
This idea of these seemingly insignificant interactions leads us to the work of Gillian Sandstrom.
Okay.
And her research on minimal social interactions.
Yeah.
What did she discover?
So Sandstrom's research started with this simple self-observation.
Okay.
She realized that she habitually avoided eye contact when, walking in public.
Yeah.
And her conscious effort to change this, seemingly small behavior led to this surprising observation in Toronto.
Oh, wow.
Where people actually seemed taken aback by her direct gaze.
Interesting.
They even assumed she wasn't local.
Wow.
And this really underscores how deeply ingrained, our avoidance of even minimal social engagement can be in some cultures.
That's fascinating, yeah. And her story about the woman with the cupcakes on the subway is such a delightful example of an unexpected connection sparked by this simple question.
It is. It is a casual inquiry about cupcakes blossomed into this whimsical conversation about riding ostriches.
Right.
And this, spontaneous, joyful exchange. It was a real aha moment for Sandstrom.
Right.
It highlighted these unexpected rewards
Yeah.
that can come from these, brief, unplanned encounters.
And her experience with the friendly hot dog vendor during her master's, program also seemed particularly insightful. Like, it wasn't this deep friendship,
Right.
but it had a real impact.
It did. And that regular, minimal interaction, just a simple greeting and exchange,
Right.
gave Sandstrom this powerful sense of belonging
Okay.
in her new environment.
Right.
It wasn't a significant relationship, but it provided this consistent positive connection
Yeah.
to her surroundings.
Yeah. And this led to her collaboration with Elizabeth Dunn on the Starbucks experiment.
Yes.
So what did they find when, people intentionally engaged with the barista as a person rather than just a service provider?
So their research revealed that when people went beyond that, purely transactional interaction.
Right.
So by, smiling, making eye contact, engaging in a brief friendly chat with the barista.
Okay.
They reported feeling this greater sense of belonging.
Okay.
And they experienced this boost in their mood compared to those who just had a, purely efficient transaction.
Wow.
So it suggests that we're often overlooking this readily available source of positive emotion by not, acknowledging the humanity of the people who serve us.
And they also looked at the impact of, weak ties, those more casual connections with acquaintances.
Yeah, those are the, the interactions we have with people we know tangentially.
Sure. Yeah.
Like that familiar face at the coffee shop or, the person you always see walking their dog.
Yeah.
And Sandstrom and Dunn found that, having more frequent weak tie interactions also correlated with greater happiness and a stronger sense of belonging, particularly on days when interactions with close friends and family were less frequent.
Interesting.
So it emphasizes that cumulative positive effect of those seemingly, minor social connections.
So now shifting to why we often don't engage.
Right.
The book delves into the work of Nicholas Epley and Juliana Schroeder on this phenomenon of silence in crowded public spaces.
Right.
What did their research uncover?
So Epley and Schroeder were, they were curious about this pervasive silence that we often observe in, crowded trains or buses.
Right.
So their initial experiment with commuters was quite illuminating.
Okay.
They asked some participants to try to talk to a stranger during their commute, others to remain solitary, and then a control group to just, commute as they normally would.
Got it.
And the surprising result was that those who engaged in conversation with a stranger reported having more positive and happier commutes.
Interesting.
And remarkably, no one in the talking group reported a negative experience.
Huh.
The average conversation lasted about 14 minutes.
Wow.
And the commuters who chatted, they formed these positive impressions of their conversational partners.
But there was this real disconnect between, what people thought would happen, what actually did.
Exactly. So in a follow-up experiment, they asked a different group of commuters to predict how they would feel in those same three scenarios.
Okay.
And they overwhelmingly anticipated feeling worse if they talked to a stranger.
Wow.
Compared to remaining alone, despite the actual experiences of the first group showing the opposite.
Interesting.
So it highlights this significant prediction error that we make about interacting with strangers.
So these findings held up in different settings, not just trains.
Yeah, they replicated these findings on buses and in taxis in Chicago.
Okay.
Consistently demonstrating that engaging in conversation with a stranger led to a more positive experience than staying silent.
It seems like the fear of rejection is a major obstacle for people.
Right.
What did Epley and Schroeder's work reveal about this specific fear?
So their research specifically addressed the fear of rejection.
Okay.
And found that participants significantly underestimated how willing strangers would be to talk.
Okay.
So despite their anxieties about, being brushed off or ignored, no one in their study who attempted to initiate a conversation reported being rejected outright.
Okay, that's reassuring. But what about the other person in the interaction? Did the stranger also enjoy the conversation?
That's a critical question. And to investigate this, Epley and Schroeder conducted an experiment in a waiting room setting. And they found that both the individuals who initiated a conversation and those who were approached reported having a better experience than those who remained silent.
Huh.
And this was true regardless of the participants' personality types. Introverts and extroverts alike benefited from the interaction.
And this positive outcome wasn't limited to, maybe the potentially more open environment of the U.S.
Right.
They replicated this in London.
Exactly. They conducted the same waiting room experiment in London.
Okay.
A city often perceived as, less open to these spontaneous interactions.
Right.
And despite the lower initial expectations from the London participants,
yeah,
the results mirrored those in the U.S.
Wow.
Engaging in conversation, whether initiating or responding, led to a more positive experience for everyone involved.
And the feedback from the London participants?
It was surprisingly encouraging, with expressing how much they enjoyed the unexpected chat.
That's interesting, yeah. This leads us to this interesting idea of pluralistic ignorance.
Right.
Can you break that down for us in this context?
So in this context, pluralistic ignorance refers to this widespread but mistaken belief that others, in a public setting prefer to be silent.
Right.
And left alone. So, we might feel this fleeting urge to chat with someone on the train.
Yeah.
But we suppress it, assuming that everyone else wants to be in their own little bubble.
Right, right.
But the reality, as Empley and Schroeder's research suggests, is that, many others might be just as open to a brief connection as we are.
Yeah.
So it's this collective misreading of each other's desires.
The book hints at an even deeper reason for our reluctance. A failure to truly see strangers as fully human?
Yes.
That sounds quite profound.
It is. And Epley and Waits coined this term lesser minds.
Lesser minds.
Lesser minds.
Yeah.
Yeah, to describe this fascinating psychological phenomenon, it's the unconscious tendency to believe that other people, particularly those we don't know, have less rich and complex inner lives than we do.
Oh, interesting.
So we might assume that they have, simpler thoughts,
right,
less nuanced emotions, a more limited capacity for agency.
Okay.
And this underestimation directly impacts our expectations for interactions with them.
Yeah.
If we don't see them as fully human, we're less likely to expect a rewarding interaction.
The anecdote about Theodore Roosevelt engaging with immigrant workers really brings that lesser minds concept to life.
Absolutely. Roosevelt's genuine curiosity and engagement with people from very different backgrounds allowed both him and them to see beyond those superficial differences,
right,
and recognize their shared humanity.
Right.
It's a powerful reminder of how direct interaction can dismantle those preconceived notions and challenge that idea of lesser minds.
Mm-hmm. And this lesser minds effect can be even stronger when we encounter people from, groups that we perceive as different from ourselves.
Right. Those outgroups.
Outgroups, yeah.
Yeah, our tendency to attribute lesser minds can be amplified when interacting with individuals from different racial, national, or political groups.
Okay.
And the example in the book about the perceived lack of genuine remorse from the Afghan soldiers illustrates how this can lead to, significant misunderstandings.
Yeah.
And a failure to recognize the full emotional complexity of those we see as other,
Yeah.
And overcoming this requires actively engaging with strangers in meaningful ways and using language as this tool for building social understanding and empathy.
Circling back to Gillian Sandstrom, she also made the point that sometimes people just don't know how to initiate a conversation with a stranger.
Exactly.
So it's not just about fear, but a lack of skill.
Right. So while the fear of rejection and the lesser minds phenomena are, significant barriers,
right,
Sandstrom also emphasizes that practical side of things.
Yeah.
Many people just haven't had much practice or don't feel equipped with those conversational tools to confidently approach someone they don't know.
And this led to the creation of organizations like Talk to Me in London?
Right.
Trying to encourage more interaction?
Yeah.
What kind of impact did they have?
So Talk to Me experimented with, simple but potentially powerful cues.
Okay.
Like distributing badges indicating openness to conversation.
Okay.
And establishing these designated talking benches.
So interesting.
And some participants reported feeling, safer and more connected simply by knowing that others around them might also be open to a chat.
Okay.
So it highlighted that positive impact of even those subtle signals of willingness to engage.
Yeah, and then Sandstrom herself developed workshops aimed at teaching those, practical conversational skills.
Right.
So what were some of the main fears that people expressed in those workshops?
The list of fears was quite revealing.
Okay.
And surprisingly universal.
Okay.
So people worried about, boring the other person,
yeah,
being unwelcome, not knowing how to politely end the conversation,
right. Enough.
disliking the interaction themselves,
Yeah.
or revealing too much personal information.
Okay.
And interestingly, these fears didn't differ significantly between men and women, but they were more pronounced among individuals who identified as, shy or socially anxious.
So what kind of practical advice did Sandstrom offer to help people overcome these anxieties and, start talking?
Her advice was very actionable.
Okay.
So, follow your genuine curiosity.
Oh.
Notice small details about the other person or their surroundings that you can comment on.
Okay.
Offer sincere compliments.
Right.
And ask open-ended questions that encourage, more than just a yes or no answer.
Yeah.
But, she also found that that often the most effective approach was simply to create this supportive environment.
Okay.
Where people felt encouraged to just try interacting.
Okay.
And then observing them discover their own, conversational style.
The book also touches on the liking gap, researched by Boothby and colleagues.
Yeah.
What is that, and how does it relate to our, reluctance to connect?
So the liking gap is this consistent tendency we have to underestimate how much a stranger actually likes us after an interaction.
Okay.
Especially if we're, shy ourselves.
Right.
So even if a conversation goes well,
yeah,
we tend to assume that the other person didn't enjoy it as much as we did.
Interesting.
And this misperception can be this, this significant barrier to future engagement.
Yeah.
Because, if we think others don't like talking to us, we're less likely to initiate further interactions.
What are some of the underlying reasons for this liking gap? Why do we misjudge others', positive feelings towards us?
Well, I think it's probably a combination of factors,
Yeah.
So social norms
Okay.
often favor politeness
Yeah.
over explicit expressions of liking.
Right.
So